Hello everyone. Let's talk about primary keys. So let me set this up for you. What you see here on the screen is you see a simple script that I wrote that creates a table called employees. Now first it drops a table called employees, then it creates a table named employees. A pretty simple script. Now, when you're just starting writing scripts or database programs, you need to know a couple of things. One of the things is, remember, what a table does in a database is it just holds rows and columns of data. Now, of course, it gets a little bit more complicated than that, but at its core, really that's all a table does. It holds data kind of like an Excel spreadsheet. Now, I know I'm being overly simplistic. If you have experience working with databases, you say, Bob, I know it's more complicated than that, and I get it, but this is kind of a beginner sort of a lesson here. But anyway, so when you create a table here, we have an employee table, and it has two columns. It has a column called emp ID, and it has a column called emp name. So there's your emp ID, there is your emp name. Now, the thing is when you create database tables, is database tables don't have any intelligence in them. Like, for example, here for the employees, I could put in, employee ID 1, employee name Bob, right? It would work just fine. Not a trick question. You would write a SQL insert, insert into employees values 1 and Bob. So what? But the thing is if you don't specify what the rules are for a table, like, for example, when I say rules, I'm talking about a concept in databases called constraints. Now, that's a big term, constraints. What constraints do is constraints allow us to specify what is valid data and what is not within tables. Now, there are different kinds of constraints. The constraint I'm going to show you here is called a primary key. It's a very simple constraint, and it's the easiest to understand. As I was talking about in my example before, I can insert multiple employee IDs 1. 1, Michael Jordan, employee ID 1, Bob, employee ID 1, Mickey Mouse. Now you think about it, you're like, wait a second, you're going to have duplicates now for the employee ID. And what I say is exactly. So what we need to do when we build the tables, we need to specify that. Like, for example, in this case, we need to say employee ID can happen once and only once, right? Like a social security number, a driver's license number, student ID, employee ID, you kind of get it, where you don't want to allow duplicates. Now, to do that in a table is we put in a constraint called a primary key, and it looks like this. It's that simple. Now, there are different kinds of primary keys. When you go into database programming in more depth, you're going to learn all about them. There's a lot more to learn about primary keys, but this is just the basics. So when I do this and I say just primary key, what this will allow now, or what this will do is it will not allow duplicate values for the employee ID. So if I insert, with a SQL statement, insert, values 1 Bob, 1 is used, so I cannot use 1 anymore. So primary key and constraints in general are more of a design thing. It's like, what do you want to do? It's do you want to allow duplicates or not allow duplicates? In this case, what we're saying here is we don't want duplicates allowed. So let me just make sure that my syntax is correct. I'll do a quick run. I'll run my script. Again, this just builds the table. And I should get table dropped. That's right, because I have an employees table and table created. Now, I'm not going to test this. I'm going to leave it up to you to do so. Now, you should know how a SQL insert works by now. If not, let me know, and I could, show you how one works. But if you insert now a row into this table, you can only use an employee ID once. If you want to reuse it, you'd have to delete the original row and then, with that employee ID number and then add one again. So that concludes my short lesson on using a primary key constraint. So thank you for listening, and I wish you all a very well rest of the day. Thank you. Hello everyone. Let's go over the concept of a foreign key. Now, my objective here for the next few minutes is not to make you an expert on what a foreign key is. It's certainly a topic that's up for more discussion when you dive deeper into database programming. So really just for our purposes here, I want to sell you, I say that a lot, on the concept of what a foreign key is in a database. Now, a foreign key is a type of database constraint. Now, a database constraint, again, is a rule that we're putting on the database that kind of enforces, what is allowed to be entered into the tables and what is not. So what a foreign key allows us to do is it allows us to relate two tables together. So I have an example here on my screen that I'm going to show you that has a foreign key, and I'm going to explain to you a little bit about how it works. Now, we have two tables here. We have an employee table and we have a department table. Now, logically think about this. And we have employees. Now, employees have, make that a little bit bigger. Employees have, they have an ID, they have a name, and they have a department ID. Now, think about the department ID. The department ID could be like 100 for HR. Department 200 can be engineering. Department 300 can be sales or whatever. Now, in real life, these department IDs need to exist, right? For example, if I work for Department 100, Department 100 has to really be part of that company. Or let's take another example. Like in class, you might have a class that's in CIS101, which is a class designation. So, that class has to exist somewhere. So in here, what we have is we have employees and we have departments. So what we can do is we can relate these two tables together. We can say, for example, employees have work for a department, and that department must exist in this table. So when we relate two tables together, such as here, employees and departments, what we do is we link them. It's probably not the right term, but we logically kind of connect them with what's called a foreign constraint. Now, what you see here on line 11 is the line of code that we put in to relate two tables together. So on line 11, we have, department ID. It's a department ID column. And what we're saying here is a department ID references the department table, the department ID column. Again, I'm just selling you on the concept of this. This is something that you would pause the video and you would think about this and you would play connect the dots. It's not something I expect you to get immediately. And that's one thing I want to emphasize about when you're learning coding. Some of this stuff takes a little bit to sink in. You got to get your hands around it a little bit and you got to try it out with some insert statements just to test it. But I'm just going to sell you on the concept of this. So the concept of this is we can have employees and the employees can have a department ID that must exist in the department table. That's really all it is. So basically that's saying is we cannot insert an employee, with a SQL insert and give him or her a department ID that does not exist in the department table. Now, just like a primary key constraint, a foreign key constraint is a design consideration. That's something that you would determine if you needed to do if you wanted to relate two tables together. You don't need to use foreign keys, but you probably should, because what happens is it allows some really decent what's called data integrity, meaning we don't want employees that have departments that don't exist. Just like a primary key doesn't allow, in this case, an employee ID to be duplicated or a department ID to be duplicated. A foreign key constraint just means that a department ID here in the employees table must first exist in the department table. Now, that's really all I want you to understand for now. Like I was mentioning just a couple minutes ago, you're going to have to kind of play with this and test it just to kind of get the gravity of this and how it really works. Just like with anything that you do with programming. It's not something that someone explains it to you and you're like, oh yeah, that's great. Yeah, I understand that. If you're scratching your head saying, wait, what, how does this actually work? That's probably where you should be. Again, this lecture, this short demonstration is really a beginner kind of introduction to foreign keys. It's by no means a deep dive into it. So if you understand the concept of this and you want to play with this code example and get it working and work with insert statements to see how, the insert statement would, fail. For example, if we were to write an insert statement that would insert employee with a department that doesn't exist, you would know that insert statement would not succeed, because what we've done here is we've said, you know what? Do not allow to have an employee with a department that does not exist in the department table. That's really all I had for you with foreign keys. So thank you for watching. Thank you for making it this far. And I bid you all a very well rest of the day. Thank you.